Wiesbaden, Germany, June 4, 1945. A former Luftwaffe flak general sits across a bare table from an American interrogator, a single folder between them. Inside is a target map of the factory complex he once helped defend, a facility he believed was one of the Reich's best-kept secrets. Every building is there, every rail spur, every water tower, every reinforced roof. He picks up the map, turns it over, looks for a stamp, a serial number, anything that might explain how a foreign air force drew his factory floor plan with the accuracy of a man who had worked there. He does not believe what he is looking at. He tells his interrogator, through gritted teeth, that it must be a trick, a document produced after the fact to unsettle him, because no outsider could have known this much before the bombs fell. He is wrong. And the truth of how the Americans knew is stranger and far less dramatic than any spy story he could imagine. This single moment, repeated in various forms across dozens of interrogation rooms in the final months of the war, captures something remarkable about the Allied bombing campaign. It was not merely powerful, it was informed to a degree that unsettled the men who had spent years hiding their industry behind camouflage netting and blackout curtains. Understanding why matters, because the story is not one of daring agents slipping through fences at midnight. It is a story about libraries, businessmen, and a small group of economists who realized that Germany had, quite unknowingly, told its enemies almost everything they needed to know. By 1943, the Allies faced a problem that seemed close to unsolvable. Strategic bombing had grown teeth, but it lacked a brain. Early raids scattered bombs across wide areas, guided by grainy photographs and pre-war assumptions that were often years out of date. Ball-bearing works, synthetic oil refineries, and aircraft component plants had been dispersed, rebuilt, and disguised since the last reliable surveys had been made. Bomber crews were flying extraordinarily costly missions, some campaigns losing more than one aircraft in 10, against targets whose true importance and vulnerability nobody could say with confidence. Planners needed to know not just where a factory stood, but which of its buildings mattered, how it drew its power, where its bottlenecks lay, and what would actually stop production rather than simply dent a wall. Existing photographic reconnaissance, however skilled, could show a roof. It could not show what was beneath it. The Allies were, in effect, trying to perform surgery on a body they could only see through frosted glass. The answer came not from a laboratory but from an unassuming Georgian townhouse in London, home to the Enemy Objectives Unit, a small American body attached to the 8th Air Force and staffed largely by academic economists, several drawn from Harvard. Men such as Charles Kindleberger approached German industry the way an auditor approaches a company's accounts, rather than the way a soldier approaches a battlefield. Their raw material was startlingly ordinary. Pre-war German trade directories listed suppliers and customers for individual factories. Technical journals described machinery and production processes in loving detail, because German engineers were proud of their work and had published accordingly. American and British firms that had licensed patents or built joint ventures in Germany before the war still held blueprints, photographs, and correspondence in their own filing cabinets. Insurance surveys, similar to the Sanborn maps used across American cities, recorded building dimensions and construction materials for the purposes of calculating premiums, not military targeting. Even pre-war tourist guides and postcards occasionally filled in gaps, confirming a chimney's height or a factory's proximity to a railway junction. None of it was stolen. Almost all of it had been sitting in plain sight for years, gathering dust in libraries and company archives on both sides of the Atlantic. From this material, the unit built what became known as target folders, thick dossiers assembled for individual factories that could run to dozens of pages, cross-referencing production capacity, critical machine types, and even the estimated number of weeks a facility would need to resume output after a given level of damage. A single well-built folder might tell a bombing planner that a ball-bearing plant near Schweinfurt held a specific type of grinding machine, of which German industry possessed only a limited number, meaning that destroying those machines rather than the surrounding walls would cause disproportionate harm. This was intelligence built from patience and cross-referencing, not from a man in a trench coat photographing documents by torchlight. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know, and there is more of this story still to come. The comparison with German efforts is instructive. The Luftwaffe's own target intelligence for raids on British industry during the Blitz relied heavily on older Baedeker guidebooks and dated aerial photography, producing bombing that was often broad and imprecise by comparison, striking residential areas as readily as factories. American economic intelligence, by contrast, increasingly aimed at what planners called the bottleneck, a single component or process without which an entire war industry might stall. The ball-bearing campaign and later the oil campaign of 1944 both reflected this philosophy, targeting the narrow choke points of German production rather than its broad and redundant surface. Post-war surveys suggested the oil campaign in particular did more to cripple German mobility, from aircraft fuel to armored vehicle operations, than almost any other single Allied effort, even though contemporary loss rates and weather often prevented anything like total success. The psychological effect on German officers and officials, once the scale of Allied knowledge became clear after capture, was significant, even if difficult to measure precisely. Several described a sense of violation, a belief that specific factories, thought to be obscure or well hidden, had somehow been penetrated. That sense of exposure, historians generally agree, says less about any actual espionage network and more about how thoroughly modern industrial society advertises itself through its own ordinary paperwork. Today, surviving target folders sit in American and British archives, unglamorous manila files that quietly outperformed the imagination of the men who once refused to believe in them. There was no double agent inside that Wiesbaden factory. There was no forged document slipped across an interrogation table for effect. There was only a library card, a trade journal, and a patient economist with a magnifying glass and a very long memory. The general who accused his captors of rigging the map was, in his own way, paying the Allies the highest possible compliment. He could not conceive of an intelligence operation built entirely from things his own country had published, sold, and shown off with pride. He looked for a spy in the room and found only a filing system. That, in the end, is the quiet and unglamorous truth of the story, and perhaps the most devastating kind of intelligence there is. Not the secret stolen in darkness, but the fact hidden in plain daylight, waiting patiently to be read.